Well, good afternoon. Be very welcome. Thank you very much for coming to this thematic panel called Gentrification and Housing, which will be divided into sessions. On the first session, we will be talking about the role of big data and gentrification. I will now introduce our speakers. And on the second part, we will be explaining the, the main characteristics of the BCN New York Affordable Housing Challenge with Mrs. Sonam Velani and Mr. Javier Buron, which will come later. In talking on big data gentrification, Kenneth Haar, who is a research and campaigner from the corporate Europe Observatory, and who is also an important part of Airbnb, will be explaining us the pressures and tensions and the fight and the debate that is going on in Brussels, whereas many of these platform economies are working on trying to change regulations, trying to see how much can be done through platforms, how much should do the cities. And second, says we have Beatriz Guijarro, who is an activist from Liquen Data, and who is studying a lot on gentrification and what's going on in some districts of Barcelona where there's a lot of gentrification, how people is living it, what kind of information can we retrieve, what can we learn from it. And in third term, we have Murray Cox, who is a creator of Inside Airbnb, very well-known platform that has helped a lot in understanding how this platform economy is affecting cities, is affecting neighborhoods, and he's working a lot along with some councils and research groups in terms of understanding what's going on, but also what kind of policies or what kind of data can we retrieve as cities. Because as we're getting more and more concerned about the effects of some platforms that could be defined as sharing or increasing troubles, but not sharing benefits, we are learning also about how big data gives us tools in monitoring a phenomena as complex as gentrification, but it may give us tools also not only to think policies but also to think projects along with the citizens, which I think it's the main goal in the coming years. And so of course we have many questions to tackle about data quality, about who provides the data, about is that data balanced. We will be talking about that. I would first like to listen to Mr. Murray Cox, who's going to explain us his experience as inside Airbnb. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go quite quickly through my slides because I have a lot. I have about 50 slides, but I'm going to just go through them very quickly. So I'm a data activist. I'm the founder of Inside Airbnb. It's a platform that provides open data on Airbnb, how it's being used in cities. I track about 100 different cities around the world. I collect data monthly, but I also work with activists around the world and cities around the world. Working with data, but also I advocate for the regulation of Airbnb and short-term rental platforms. So I'm going to talk today just a little bit about impact on housing. So what are the negative impacts of platforms like Airbnb? Talk about the city resistance or regulation against Airbnb. I'm going to talk about a study that I did that looked at gentrification in New York City and specifically racial gentrification, and then I'll just talk about the civic resistance. So in terms of the impact on housing, over the last 4 or 5 years, researchers have started to use data to quantify the impact on cities. What are the negative impacts of Airbnb and other platforms? In New York City in 2016, 8,000 apartments taken off the market, and then a year later, 13,500 housing units taken off the market in a city that's struggling to provide affordable housing. Rents went up $380, in some neighborhoods $700. The comptroller just did a study earlier this year, and they found that the impact of Airbnb on rents in New York City in 1 year was $616 million that residents had to pay, the tenants had to pay more in rent. if we talk about the city resistance and regulation, here's a map chart of New York City. You can see the listings are growing. The blue line are entire home listings. In most cities, the majority type of listing are entire homes. So potentially someone could be living there. You can see that they go up. Even when a law was signed banning, well, the law is that entire homes are banned in New York City. In 2016, a law was put into effect where the city just had to find an advertisement of a home being rented out in an apartment building that fines could be levied, but the number keeps on going up. Here's a chart for Berlin. Again, they had an entire home ban back in 2016. The number dropped for a short time, and then it just kept on going up. In London, they have a 90-day cap. Here's a distribution of occupancy for a year, so a number of nights rented per year. You can see that there are properties being listed more than 90 days. Airbnb self-regulates in the city, but there's still a lack of compliance. And there's about 7,000 apartments in London that are being rented for more than 90 days, i.e. permanently taken off the market. San Francisco is a good model. In January this year, they put into effect laws that limit, that make the platforms accountable to only display listings that have been through a permit process, which in the case of San Francisco requires proof of primary residency, a 90-day cap for entire home rentals, and there are also some restrictions on private room rentals. San Francisco is probably the only city around the world, apart from Tokyo, that you'll see this, an effective regulation. In San Francisco, listings dropped by more than 50% as a result of the regulations, so that they were enforceable because of the platform liability. The platforms were forced to follow the law rather than the platforms pushing the law onto the host and the city having to fine the hosts. I'm going to talk a little bit about the US at the moment. Back in the 1930s, the federal government racialized mortgages by producing the securitization maps. Red, you couldn't get a mortgage in, and they became the white residents that lived there moved to the suburbs, and they were able to buy property. But in effect, this segregated America. This happened in 239 cities around the world, in the US, and that's called redlining. But I mention this because it's important to understand, to remind you that the US is very racially segregated, but it's a way that we can look at gentrification. You have black neighborhoods representing the long-term residents, and then you have gentrifiers moving in, which are more likely to not be black, taking advantage of tools like Airbnb. These are some of the I'll just flick through these because it's not that important, but this is a map of my tool in New York City. I collect data on the type of Airbnb listing, how often it's being rented out, how many listings a host has. You can also download data yourself if you're a researcher, an activist, or you are a member of the city. I provide data to the city of San Francisco, New York, Minneapolis, and universities around the world. There are also some commercial providers of Airbnb data. For example, AirDNA, they provide data for a fee. They're actually ex-Airbnb hosts, so they're really aligned with the property market. This is one of my early prototypes of my tool. Instead of putting a dot on the map, I put the host photograph. And this is my neighborhood in Bedford-Stuyvesant. It's an African-American and Afro-Caribbean neighborhood, a black neighborhood. Most of the host photos you see up there are white photographs. It got me thinking about who was benefiting, who was using Airbnb as hosts in my neighborhood. My neighborhood is about 75% black. So if you have a majority of hosts using Airbnb, what was that doing to the neighborhood, given that there are negative effects, given that Airbnb was taking housing off the market in neighborhoods that were suffering from displaced residents. This is what Airbnb says about the problem. They say that they can support low-income communities by providing additional income. What they don't tell you is, are people with high income in low-income neighborhoods, are they the ones getting the extra income, or are they people that, are they the low-income residents that are able to benefit from Airbnb? They say the same thing about black neighborhoods. They talk about the growth of Airbnb in black neighborhoods, but they also don't talk about who's using it. They use people in the community for their marketing to try to paint a picture that they're good for communities. There's been some racial discrimination studies done on Airbnb. Two very good ones at Harvard Business School. One finding that hosts are likely to racially discriminate against guests, and that white hosts can charge more than black hosts for a similar property. But as we get back to this prototype that I built, how can I quantify this disparity in this black neighborhood? And so I spoke to the authors of the Harvard Business School studies, and they said, well, why don't you do what they did and racially code the photographs to white or black, and then I'll be able to measure the disparity. So you can use software to racially code. The Harvard had actually racially coded with software, but they also had researchers manually racially code, so they were able to calibrate the accuracy of the software. And they gave me some advice to get some very to calibrate to a certain accuracy, so I could get within 90% accuracy when I'm racially coding. So I racially coded every host in New York City, and I looked at majority black neighborhoods, and this is what I found. Across 72 neighborhoods that are majority black, so it's a black majority in the neighborhood, Airbnb hosts are 5 times more likely to be white. So for example, there are 15% in the black neighborhoods, 15% white population, 75% white Airbnb host population. It's a 500% disparity. Same disparity on income levels. This is my neighborhood. It's even higher percentage black, so it's 89.7% black, but the Airbnb host population is only 20% black. So it's a 1,000% disparity. And I think that's really important as we think about who's benefiting from Airbnb in neighborhoods. If you take race out of the equation and you substitute long-term residents, gentrifiers are benefiting from Airbnb. How did Airbnb respond to this? They hired Danny Glover, a well-known actor, but he's also, to give him credit, an activist, to promote Airbnb in black neighborhoods. So instead of addressing the problem that that there are disparities, that it's removing housing, they just really want to improve their marketing. They also did a deal with the NAACP. It's a very well-respected civil rights group in the US. But again, it was about outreach and education, revenue sharing. So it didn't really impact the issue. It might promote more African Americans and Afro-Caribbeans to use Airbnb, but it didn't try to limit the issue. It didn't try to limit the impact in black neighborhoods. I'll just talk about the civic resistance. Airbnb is also talking about healthy travel and healthy destinations, which is a big issue in places like Barcelona and Venice, where it's not just about short-term rentals, it's about over-tourism. It's about touristification. And so Airbnb is promoting that issue as well. They've got host clubs organized that are lobbying cities to promote deregulation. This is the resistance against Airbnb. There are hotel workers in New York City. This is in LA, residents in Los Angeles, people in Sydney, Australia, owners corporations in Melbourne. We've got associations in Venice. Venice is not a hotel. And then we've got the ABTS in Barcelona. There's also a movement in Southern Europe to combat tourism. And so, from my point of view, I hope I've really talked about some of the impacts of Airbnb, but also the resistance both from cities. There is starting to be some effective regulation, but there's a vibrant community that's resisting Airbnb around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Kenneth, as Ivan was saying, we do have a trend that continues. A trend that continues in Brussels, especially, right? Where being aware of all these things that are going on and finding a balance is an important thing as in your work as a watchdog. So I would like you to explain us what you're doing.
I haven't got a presentation. I'll be unplugged today, so I hope the sound system works. My name is Kenneth. I work for, as was explained, I work for a lobby watchdog, Corporate Europe Observatory, based in Brussels. And it would be fair to ask, what's our asset? What's our part of the story on platforms, particularly on Airbnb? The reason why I'm standing here is mainly because of an assignment we got last year in Barcelona, actually. We met with housing activists and with people from the city council and with academics. And we got our head probably around the effect of these platforms on neighborhoods, the rapid gentrification that can happen, the turning of neighborhoods into theme parks. At one point, we were asked, well, could you imagine that the European institutions play a role in all this? Because at the city council level, we regularly encounter problems. When the city council sets out to regulate these platforms, we're often told that this or that could be a problem because of European law. Anyway, we decided to accept the challenge, and after a couple of months work and going through heaps of documents and dozens of meetings in Brussels, an image started to appear. We were not quite sure what we would find, but the conclusion could put very briefly and bluntly that at the moment, the issue of access to affordable housing and the issue of the effect that these platforms have on city landscapes is of very, very little concern to the European institutions. Their focus is economic. Their focus is about the rules that you can distill from the single market. This is not just about Barcelona, obviously. I mean, the attempts to regulate these platforms have been spreading across Europe the past couple of years. There is Berlin, where you have pretty tough rules in place at the moment, where it is forbidden to turn an apartment rented out to locals into a flat for tourists. There is Amsterdam, where the number of days that you can rent out to tourists is limited. In a short while, it will be brought down from 90 days to 30 days. And there are many others. These initiatives at the local level to protect the access to affordable housing have been spreading like a bushfire. Last year, earlier this year, when we finished our report, in the week before we put the final dot on paper, There were news in about stronger rules in Vienna, stronger rules in Frankfurt, in Palma de Mallorca, and the list goes on. So the question is, how does Brussels respond to this challenge? There's one thing we need to know first, and that is that a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, the European Commission put itself on a very specific political track. The effort of the European institutions in this area is supposed to strengthen and support what they call the collaborative economy. So, a supportive function. And in what way? Well, mainly by going through the rules of the single market and figure out what the implications of European law would be, and how European law can indeed be used to support the expansion of the platforms. This has over the years played very well into the hands of not a huge group of lobbyists, but actually a very small group. I've been focusing on the one that represents Airbnb and HomeAway and the others. But even though they are actually perhaps only a dozen people, their impact has been huge. Simply because of the fact that the Commission sees it as its task to support them. So while it can be difficult, say, for housing activists to discuss Airbnb with the Commission, where it can even be difficult for a municipality or a city council to get the attention of the Commission, once you represent a big platform, you are, in the eyes of the European Commission, a representative for the bright future of innovative business. To be specific, what have they been doing over the past years? And we are really only talking about the last 3 years of a lobbying campaign in Brussels. I would boil it down to 3 main achievements. The first is that a little more than 2 years ago, the Commission produced what they call a communication, which is mainly about what can cities not do, what kind of initiatives should they refrain from when they attempt to regulate short-term rental accommodation platforms. For instance, it is stated in the communication it would not be wise to use any kind of bans. It is stated in the communication that platforms can only be asked for an authorization under certain conditions. It is stated that quite generally the idea to have a maximum number of permits, which is the case here in Barcelona, could very possibly be in violation of EU law. That is not just a piece of paper. That is an action plan from the Commission, written in June, finished in June 2016. From then on, the Commission has developed a clear idea of what municipalities are allowed to do and what not. The action comes in when particular cities comes into the crosshair of the Commission, and at the moment 4 cities are under investigation, you could say. The lobby groups in Brussels have filed a complaint over Barcelona, Paris, Berlin and Brussels, and consequently the Commission has decided to enter into a dialogue with the Spanish, German, French and Belgian governments, which could, if the Commission finds that regulation in these cities are too strong, in violation of single market disciplines and EU law, these 4 cases could end up in the European Court of Justice. Now, to be in the European Court of Justice as a city is not a nice place to be. That's the highest legal authority in the European Union, and should, for instance, the European Court of Justice decide that Barcelona is in breach of the the rules of the single market, there would be little else to do but to change existing regulation, which in this case would be to a weaker form of regulation. One last example that I think, if I have I got 2 minutes? One last example is not less important. It's an ongoing debate at the moment. It's a very specific proposal tabled by the Commission. It's called the Services Directive Notification Procedure. Doesn't sound very sexy. I've decided that hence from now on I will call it the intimidation procedure. The procedure is about the following. Whenever a city council is about to produce a new rule, a new regulation of the platforms, for instance, or actually anything else in the area of services, 3 months before it is decided by the council, they have to notify the European Commission. The European Commission will then go through the proposal meticulously and decide whether it is in line with European law. If it is not in line with European law, the City Council will receive an alert that this proposal should not be adopted. If the City Council goes ahead anyway and adopts the proposal, the Commission will adopt a position requiring the member state in question to change the decision just made by the City Council. Now that's in my political world, that's really, really serious. This completely changes the political dynamic inside the City Council to the favor of more and more liberalization, and it could very easily paralyze any attempt to adopt further rules on the platforms. The final remark should be that whereas this can sound also scary, the EU institutions are very, very powerful. There are very promising signs that at the moment cities are coming together. I believe that for a long time cities have not been present enough in the discussions in the EU institutions. I think it's becoming clear that it is indeed a necessity if, for instance, we are to create the political space needed to regulate these platforms. There's no way around Brussels. There's no way around dealing with European politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. And finally, we have Beatriz Guijarro with us, which, as I said, is an activist from Liquen Data. We are experiencing different quality of data and different ways of retrieving data, but also social networks explain us a lot about what gentrification is, how it's lived in neighborhoods, and how it can create new social networks to fight against it. So please, thanks.
Good afternoon, and thanks, Tonet, for the introduction. Well, in this short brief talk, I would like to bring some highlights of online narratives around gentrification, which have been collected in the recent years in the context of Barcelona. I will talk about the evolution of mentions in Twitter, as well as the distribution of outstanding themes. In a first exercise, I would like to show the evolution of the Twitter posts related to gentrification in the context of Barcelona from 2014 to the current month. As we can see in the first graphic, which the red one part corresponds to the publication and the blue one part corresponds to the impressions that in Twitter tells us the impact of these publications, we clearly see that the level of conversation increases exponentially year by year. 2018 is the temporary range, which collects more mentions, with a total of 11,192. Taking into account that the year has not finished yet. This represents a 32.8% more than 2017, year which had already very high publication levels compared to the previous years. We must bear in mind that although 2017 and 2018 condensed the 70.9% of publications, In the previous years, some highlights allow us to affirm that gentrification is not an issue that's just broken into the political agenda as a key matter. It has been standing out since July 2015, with the blocking of licenses for new hotels and the questioning of the touristic model of the city. Currently, in 2018, thanks to community organization among citizens and the eruption of institutional anti-gentrification driving policies, settled down a new local and international projection of the city, accurately analyzed by the article published by The Guardian, Tourists Go Home, Refugees Welcome, Why Barcelona Choose Migrants Over Visitors. Making a more specific review of subthematic evolution since 2014, I will show you a little infographic abstract graphic where we can identify the evolution of subtle differences, validating that the issues concerning rental prices and above all the management of mass tourism are positioned in the center of the debate in Twitter, in detriment of emptying flats and property moving. Speaking of trends, we also are interested to do a scoop in 2018. We must highlight the collective and networking effort that is being done in the city, where there are many stakeholders performing unpayable tasks in both online and online scenarios. In that second one, the online, between the neighborhoods classically affected by gentrification as Gracia, Sants, and Al Raval, in 2018, the new view of San Antonio stand out as the neighborhoods with a higher increase in publications. A neighborhood wherein a city immersed and aware of the debate of gentrification completes the pharaonic, endless reform of the modernist market of San Antonio. A neighborhood that observed how throughout this culmination, the factors and actors of gentrification immediately put themselves in orbit and position to attack. And when we refer to immediately, we do in a sense of pornographic explicitly gentrifying process. To give a simple example, during the days close to May 26, day of the official opening of event of the San Antonio market and its surroundings, the real estate agent Engel and Volkers published an advertisement which aims to purchase a house in it, under the slogan, "Imagine living near the market of San Antonio!" As you can see in the first image of two. Accompanied by an image that evokes a high-standing home. Advertising that was immediately revoked by the neighbors with a counter-campaign that faked it under the mantra, "Stop being poor." Just a little example of collective intelligence and their action predisposition present in the city of Barcelona that we must credit, recognize, protect, and award as our precious anti-gentrification defense. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now we have like 16 minutes for your questions, and we do have some questions on the tablet. So, Murray, an anonymous was asking, how does racial disparity of Airbnb hosts compare with economic disparity of rates in the US? And is this not a reflection of systemic injustices? Yes, of course. Yes.
Well, I think the question is it's asking, there's systemic racism that exists already in the US. And so if we find if we find a disparity in Airbnb, what's so surprising about that? I mean, I think that's right. There is, it's not a result of, well, we can think of technology tools as being neutral and the society as being, they're having problems. But when we have companies like Airbnb promoting themselves in neighborhoods, and the economic opportunity that's being taken advantage of in those neighborhoods is being taken advantage by white gentrifiers. But at the same time, Airbnb is saying we don't want to be regulated or capped at all. So they don't care about the housing impacts. Then I think then there's a case for the tool being not neutral and amplifying these disparities that exist, both the disparities that you see with hosts accepting guests, with the host prices, but also the impact on housing in these black neighborhoods. The fact that they're promoting the issue, but at the same time they're advocating for not being regulated. I think that's where the danger is.
Thank you. I don't know if the public has questions. If you can get close to the microphone, please. And Beatriz, we were talking about how these platforms are not neutral in economic terms. Do you think that there's a correlation also with the social networks in terms of what kind of user is telling what in the social networks? Is there a correspondence between what's been said in Twitter and what people in general is feeling in the neighborhood? Have you been studying that?
Well, I think, of course, there's a relation between the online and offline scenarios. Maybe in this case, in the concrete case of San Antonio neighborhood, I think that the which are the neighbors creating is a really dense network, and it corresponds to the visibility in Twitter. Sometimes in another cases, maybe the visibility in Twitter is really high, and then you find that in the streets there is no movement. It counts anything, but yeah, I think there is a correlation between two spheres, but we have to take the online and the offline with a different sense of interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Kenneth, we have two questions for you, but in a way they are the same. The first is, what tools do municipalities have at their disposal to combat lobby groups in Brussels? Which maybe you can talk about the agreement yesterday between the cities and how this is going to help you as a watchdog in Brussels. But at the same time, how do you think that we have to couple with clashes between European Commissions and between the European Commission and municipalities regarding Airbnb?
How should we deal with that?
Yes, how to couple. I think it's couple, but
I think the key word is, at the moment, the key word is politicizing the matter. Because the way that this has been dealt with so far in Brussels is at very technical meetings that involves the European Commission only and lobbyists. It's not some very big open debate that has taken place in the European institutions. In fact, such a debate is very absent. The fact that these platforms are being challenged at the local level for their effect on the availability of affordable housing, I would not say it's unknown in Brussels, but it's not a big issue, which means that way too often it can be ignored. It can be forgotten. Let me give you one very, very depressing example. It's about another European institution, the European Parliament. The European Parliament has dealt with these platforms only once. It was a resolution from June 2017, and it's about the platforms in general. It only has one single line about the accommodation platforms, and it reads something like, the European Parliament condemns the measures taken by cities that restrict the operations of the platforms. Now, condemn, that's very, very strong wording. That's something you would use when it's about an attack with chemical weapons, but you don't use them against cities that are actually trying to defend affordable housing. Now, I have convinced myself that this is not because all 785 European parliamentarians are stupid and cynical. I think it's because the discussion is not out there in Brussels. So we need someone to raise the matter, and we need someone close to the issue with some kind of political clout, and that can only be city councils and mayors. We will have to accept that some of our public money should be spent in the coming years on city councillors' involvement in European politics. We will have to accept the fact that mayors should often go to Brussels to raise their voice, because it is the only way that this matter can get the attention it deserves in the European institutions, and it seems to be the only way to counter the offensive that we have been following, that Airbnb lobbyists have been unfolding over the past couple of years. And I'm not pessimistic about the effect that it could have. I think from what I hear, there are many European cities who are prepared to be involved in such a campaign, and it will have an impact, I'm sure.
Thank you. I don't know if we have any questions in the audience. Does anybody want to ask something? I do have a question for you, Maury. I think that you've been working with many municipalities in the United States in trying to finding policies, ways. What can we learn from that in comparing different cities? And is there tools, or can we have tools that we can share with other cities and understand how this could be more fair, let's say?
Well,
Is it off? That's it.
okay. Well, I do work with cities, some more than others. I have very good relationships with, for example, the city of San Francisco, the city of New York. In those cases, I provide data monthly. And they use that data for many different purposes: to analyze the issue, to form policy, for creating their regulations, and also for enforcement. And so I think data is important. It's not the only thing. I think the most important thing is good regulation, effective regulation. And so the city legislators need to do that. But the first thing is identifying the impact. And usually you need data for that. In many cases, I provide data by request. And if the issue is important, I will prioritize that and then provide the data for free. So that's something that cities around the world can utilize. You usually can't ask the platforms for data. They will refuse, or they'll try and negotiate with you. So I think that's something that cities can keep in mind. But then also looking at cities where they're having good effects on the issue. So the city of Amsterdam, Barcelona as an example, although historically the cap that exists in Barcelona, in my opinion, is very high. It's 9,000 or 10,000 permits. And so although they've been effective somewhat in enforcing it, the regulations are not where they should be. But so most cities are coming up with permit systems, with a license number that needs to be displayed on an advertisement, but then platform accountability. And that's what San Francisco has, that if a platform displays a listing that doesn't have a permit, that's not verified, the city has the right to ask the platform to take it down. Otherwise, there's fines per day per listing. And so I think that's critical. And so cities can look around now at what other cities are doing, and then it's also a collaboration amongst the cities. On Monday, there was a Sharing Cities summit where they were talking about some of these subjects including a task force for lobbying the EU and another task force for supporting each other with knowledge, with good regulation and good practice.
So, of course, we're talking a lot about Airbnb because we have two specialists on these platforms. But when we talk about big data, we talk about lots of data of private companies that know a lot about what we do, how we live, what kinds of things we do. And of course, there's a question about how this data should be or not public or publicized. I don't know when you approach the debate in a neighborhood, how concerned they are. If they are only concerned about changes, about housing, or if they try to understand that there is much more, in play with many other platforms, with many businesses going on, and how much of civic resistance we are finding in the neighborhoods against this, this kind of movements or invasion of some ways of doing things.
Thanks. As we can see in the first slide in my presentation, the debate of gentrification is not new in the political gay agenda, and it's not new in the debate that happens in the neighborhoods, in the assemblies, and in the social movements in Barcelona, maybe with another term that's not called gentrification, but the problems related to gentrification, it being in the center of the debate, especially in the neighborhoods affected by this, since we can see in the presentation 2014, but I can assure you that it's not the first years that they divided. Barcelona has a really long tradition of civil resistance, not only with gentrification, with a lot of terms. And I think that we are not aware of the potentiality of the civic action in the city of Barcelona. But they are really good organized. I know the different assemblies which stays in Ciutat Vella, that it's one of the districts who has more implications in gentrification, and we have to be proud, and we have to respect, and we have to award, and we have to give more recognition of this social civil resistance, because it can the best diagnosis actor that we can have in our city is the classic social civil resistance movements, and for the action direct and city councils and the social movement have to work together.
Yeah. Okay. We have run out of time, so thank you very much for coming, Murray, Kenneth, and Beatriz. We have now 15 minutes for networking while drinking a coffee. You have some coffees at the back. And we come back talking about this New York City, Barcelona challenge in affordable housing. Thank you. So, hello, good afternoon again. We start now our second session of our program called Gentrification and Housing, fighting gentrification while creating vibrant communities. And now our goal is to present Barcelona and New York City Affordable Housing Challenge. We have with us Ana Majó, who is the Technical Director of Digital Innovation of the city. Second position, Javier Burón Cuadrado, who is the Housing Manager of Barcelona also. We have Sonam Velani, who is, let me read it, Senior Advisor for Housing and Economic Development at New York City Council. And finally, Eduard Cabré, who is the International Relations Officer at Barcelona Housing Department. So I'll first give a word to Ana, who is going to explain us how are we managing through digital innovation this challenge.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for being here. In fact, for us, I wanted to say, first of all, that I'm very happy that we could reach that moment and that we can announce a joint challenge between New York and Barcelona. And I would like to explain a little bit how it began and why we are working like that. As you know, these days we are talking about smart city. I'm not going to go very far away, but at the very beginning, when we are talking about a smart city, sometimes it was like putting technology into cities, but sometimes we didn't know exactly why and what we were looking for. After a while, we all understand that technology can do almost everything, and everything we can imagine, and if it cannot do it right now, it will do it like in short term. So the thing is not what to do that technology allow us to do, but what the cities need. And this is the focus of a smart city right now, and this is the focus as Barcelona is tackling this, and I'm sure New York is doing just the same, and a lot of cities in the world. So the idea is, what are the main city challenges, and how can we use technology as an enable to solve them, but always in an open and collaborative way. So working with ecosystems, working with the startups, companies, working, of course, with the citizens and with the civic associations. So how we can collaborate all the innovation ecosystem of the cities, maybe using technology, maybe not, probably yes, because technology accelerates the process of innovation and can make it bigger. But what are the main challenges of the cities? Because of that, Barcelona launched very recently. We've been doing, let's say, this approach for a while and for some years, but we launched very recently what we called iLab, and I don't know if I can. Yeah. So it's an urban innovation lab. That the idea is exactly what I said just before. So the idea is we needed a tool, we needed a methodology to work together with the different agents of the ecosystem in order to define which are the main challenges of the cities, and then try to look for solutions all together, open, collaborative, and after that try to see if it works or not, if we need to pilot, if we need to test, just do it, and then scale the solutions. There's a lot of companies doing that, there's a lot of institutions doing that, but as a city council, we think it's important to do that because we want to do that with the problems that really we manage, so the problems that really the municipality care about, because we are the agent that can scale solutions. If we have the challenges that we have budget on it, we have resources on it, we have people working and taking care about it, it's the way that afterwards we can scale the solutions. And in fact, I want to talk like with a word that it's not very appealing, but we think it's very important, that it's the public procurement, because the public procurement for us, it's really a tool to foster innovation and to make things happen and to make it scale. And that's why we create this iLab, that we care, as you can see here, we look for the challenges, we working together with all the departments in City Council, which are these challenges, we find it, we publish in our websites and in our media, in order to find these companies or citizens or startups that offer solutions. We test them, and after we scale. Which solutions are we looking for? We look for solutions that can use technology, but always taking into account the technology that Barcelona wants to foster, so technology that is responsible, that is ethical. We really care about the data of the solutions, how they manage it, who owns the data of the solutions, etc. And we also want to work, and for us it's really a good thing today, we want to work in an alliance with other cities, because as you know, challenges are global. We all face housing, mobility, transportation, environment, pollution. We all face these type of problems are global. So we think if we work in alliance with other cities, it's easier to define the challenge, but also it's easier for the companies to propose solutions that can be scaled afterwards. So saying that, I want to finish just to say we are really happy about working with New York. They will explain better, but Barcelona and New York have been working on housing for a while already. We've been sharing these challenges, we've been defining some solutions, and now we are launching this challenge together in order to look for solutions. So I let the floor to them, to Sonam and Mr. Buron, and afterwards Eduard will explain exactly how you can propose any solution to this challenge that we are tackling. Thank you.
So Javier, how can a challenge help us to have more affordable housing in both cities?
Hello. I think it's the first time that I have been presented as Mrs. Buron, and I really don't mind. I think it's fun. You should, in theory, they are charging a few slides, but nevertheless, a few ideas, a few introductory ideas. Cities in Spain, we don't have the powers to act in housing. The powers are allocated at the regional level. So cities, we are allowed to intervene in housing, but we don't have the legal obligations to intervene. So this is the first thing that should be taken into account. And the second thing that I think is important to bear in mind is that traditionally we haven't had very developed housing policies here in Spain, neither in Catalonia. So compared to other European or Western housing policies, we are behind. We haven't done as many things and in as many ways as in other places. So the main effort of the main purpose of or effort, no, this is or the main purpose of the Barcelona Right to Housing plan is to be able to develop as many tools as possible in order to create a framework of different ways of intervening in the housing market and providing social and affordable housing. In a way, we defend the approach of whatever it works, it will be adopted by us. In this chart over here, you have the objectives in terms of provision of housing. This doesn't have to do with allowances or subsidies, but the three different ways of obtaining new units are here represented through the objectives in building, in purchasing, and in mobilizing vacant stock to affordable rental. And if you see the different approaches, the different tools and methods, we are doing, as I told to you, whatever it works. We are building ourselves, we are helping other social providers to build and to produce affordable units in co-housing, in cooperatives, foundations, or housing associations, and mainly devoted to rental. And this is a turning point in our history, in our recent history, because administrations, basically, we were building to sell, not to rent. 80% of our objectives are set to be done in rental, and not only in terms of providers, tenures, and ways to accede to housing. We are also changing the type of equipments, buildings, units, and socio-residential facilities, equipments that we are creating. Here you have pictures of houses and what we call habitatge dotacional, which are equipments, facilities that are done by the housing administration, but they are run, the services are provided by the social team, by the social department, which is a scheme that we reproduce in many different fields. We do it for inclusion, but we also do it for elder people. Over here you have pictures of two different strategies. We are, as I told you, we are helping other social providers to produce housing, affordable housing. The example in the upper part belongs to La Borda, which is a co-housing project that is based on a municipal plot of land and other subsidies and helps that we give to this cooperative. In the lower part you have, this is a regular, normal apartment building in the existing city. We have a purchasing program as well, which is something quite new and quite different in terms of affordable housing policies, because most cities, most municipalities in Catalonia and Spain, they don't have the means, the financial means in order to be a big buyer and purchaser, an active purchaser in the city. This is very much related to the initial question of Tonet. What can we do in order to produce faster, cheaper, and in a more industrialized way in order to benefit from technology? This is our APROP program. Right now is under a tender, a public procurement procedure. We have chosen several providers, and they are set to deliver these units that they have several novelties for us. In first thing, they will be, again, as I told you, socio-residential facilities, because it's a joint effort of the housing and social departments. They are temporary accommodation. They are used as a way to produce mobility within the social stock, the public stock. They can be reallocated. These buildings, they can be dismantled and reallocated in another place in the city. And in theory, they should be cheaper, faster, and a way to experiment in terms of industrialization. The next example, my last example, is a very sophisticated way to call it. They call it urban odontology, but if I may, I prefer to use a more culinary way of approach it. This is topping and stuffing in buildings where we still have available room on top of the building, or in some places within the building. Nowadays we have technological solutions in order to obtain residential units on top or within the building. This is a private example, but right now we are also doing our own project in the district of Gracia. Well, I'm finishing. We face a real tough challenge. Of all the things that we are doing, that as I told you before in the initial slide, in terms of provision, it goes up to more than 18,000 units. If you approach the problem not only in terms of the city of Barcelona, if you take into account the metropolis of Barcelona, the need is much more higher. We have to do an effort in order to produce at least 75,000 affordable units, which means that we will have to jump from an expenditure, a public expenditure right nowadays of 500 million euros to more than 8.5 billion euros. And we have many problems to do that. The first one, of course, is financial, budgetary, but we also do have a problem in terms of technology. We need new technologies in order to go faster, cheaper, and more efficient without sacrificing quality. This is one of the main reasons of our collaboration with the City of New York and with other international partners. And this is the main explanation of this affordable housing international challenge. We need all that energy that is outside there in the market and in the society and in the academia in order to provide with solutions to go faster, because the challenge that we are facing in the metropolis of Barcelona is immense, and we need to burn faces as fast as possible. And this will be it, and I will give the floor to my colleague from the city of New York.
Thank you, Javier. Let me. So, this is actually my first time in Barcelona, and when I arrived here over the weekend, I was fascinated by the incredible amount of energy in the city, the incredible amount of diversity in the city, but also, you know, how dynamic this place is. And it reminded me quite a bit of my home, New York City, and some of the challenges that both of us face. You know, when we talk about inclusive cities, here we have two global cities with incredibly different personalities, but more in common than some might think. Over the past couple of decades, both cities have become safer and more prosperous. As a result of this prosperity, we find ourselves needing to accommodate those moving here to pursue their dreams, whether it's to build a new business, to start a career, to build a new Fortune 500 company, or even seek refuge from other parts of the world that are not as fortunate. And as Javier and the team have mentioned, you know, we also have to increase the number of families who want to stay, who want to stay in our cities for the long term. This includes families with children. It includes individuals who may want to retire in our cities and be at the center of it all. And at the end of the day, it's all about housing. We need more of it. We need to keep it affordable. And this is how we can ensure that we can sustain this growth and make sure that we're not the victims of our own success. I want to explain just a little bit about the New York City context and what we're facing. In today's New York, you need to earn about $35 per hour to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in our city. People earning minimum wage, which is about $15 per hour in New York, need to work 107 hours per week to pay the rent. That means working 15-hour days, 7 days a week. 53% of all New York City households are rent burdened, which means that they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. And the share of the rent burdened population has actually increased 12 percentage points over the past almost 2 decades, since the year 2000. And we have just over 1 million renter-occupied households in our city who earn less than 50% of our median income, which is about $52,000 a year. That said, we have less than 500,000 units that are affordable to these individuals. So clearly, if we let these types of trends persist, we're going to have a huge problem. And that's a little bit of why we're here. Today, I want to offer some of the lessons that New York City has pursued over the past couple of years to address this crisis, and ask all of you to help us future-proof our cities in terms of how we build affordable housing and how we sustain it over the long term. This is Mayor Bill de Blasio. He's my boss. And when he stepped into office in 2014, we had a very clear mandate to address this crisis in our city and create dynamic policies that reflect changing market conditions. When we sketched out our 10-year housing plan in 2014, we asked ourselves a number of key questions. You know, how do we confront this crisis of affordability? How do we increase overall supply? What are the populations and income levels we should prioritize? What is the right balance between rental stock as well as home ownership? Should we focus on producing new housing or protecting the existing housing at affordable rates? And how should we incentivize the private sector, whether through mandates or through tax breaks or creative new incentives? In addition, how should we balance our zoning to create more housing, but also balance the need for additional jobs, open spaces, transportation, and everything else that makes the city what it is? While these policies and decisions are inherently political at the end of the day, we try to focus on key principles to help us forward. Number one, our housing policies must address the city's changing demographics and expand the range of those we serve. A sustainable and fair housing market is one that meets the needs of the most vulnerable low-income New Yorkers, but also our teachers, our firefighters, our nurses, our middle-income workers who are increasingly being priced out of our city. One example of how we're trying to better align our housing stock with our demographics is the fact that the number of people in New York City over the age of 65 is projected to grow 40% by 2040. So whenever most of you think of New York, you think of a very young, dynamic, hip city. But the fact of the matter is that our population is getting older, and therefore we need to create new housing stock that is much more aligned with their needs. So smaller apartments, more shared services, and more inclusive neighborhoods. Our second principle is that the city's planning process and land use policies must consider entire neighborhoods, not just individual buildings. To become a more affordable city, we need to become a denser city. And if you can imagine, even in New York City, we have debates about how tall buildings should be. So it's quite a big issue for us. When we think about smart densification, that means investing in infrastructure and services that will make our cities and our neighborhoods more livable. We go out early and often to speak with communities about what they want and incorporate their needs into our plans. The third aspect is about economic diversity, and it's a cornerstone of our housing development policies. When we rezone a neighborhood or a large private site and unlock substantial new housing capacity and value, we don't encourage developers to just build affordable housing. We require it. With New York City's passage of mandatory inclusionary housing, we have assured that as the city grows, so will the stock of our permanent housing. For any new development that is in a rezoned area, we require that at least 30% of the units in each of those developments is at below market rates. And the government works hand in hand with the private sector and developers to make sure that happens. Number 4, we leverage our municipal tools and public assets to be more effective. When we subsidize projects, we ensure that we're not just subsidizing them for the short term, but that they are permanently affordable. And we structure complex deals to be the best, leveraging our full resources and funding streams from our state and federal governments as well to ensure their effectiveness. In addition to that, we seize every single portion of our public lands and our waterfront spaces to create additional housing. This entire boulevard here is the waterfront areas of Brooklyn and Queens, which are growing in New York City. And we must ensure that every new building that comes up has affordability requirements built into them. And then finally, we also focus on making sure that our past investments are protected and that affordability is locked into our neighborhoods. New York City has invested billions and billions of dollars in subsidized affordable housing. Our budget for the 10-year plan is over $8 billion. And as Javier was saying, we are fortunate enough to have those resources, but even in our city, that's not enough. Our entire housing plan in partnership with the private sector is over $40 billion. And we're still in a housing crisis. So that's just to give you perspective on the gravity of the challenges that we're facing here. We cannot afford to lose any investment that we make, and we are particularly concerned about rent protections and expiring regulatory agreements with our state and federal partners and ensure that they, again, last the test of time. So this is where we are today. Back in 2014, we launched Housing New York, which at that time, we were planning to either create or preserve 200,000 units of affordable housing over the next 10 years. We have actually gone way beyond in terms of success metrics, And in 2017, we actually increased our goal with our Housing 2.0 plan and went from 200,000 units over 10 years to 300,000 units over 12 years. This past year, in 2017, we surpassed an all-time record of affordable housing production in New York City and financed over 32,000 units in a single year. Again, this is record-breaking since history has been recorded. And again, it goes to the success of the plan, but also our continued efforts to make sure that these opportunities last. But we also know that no matter how good our plan is, that there's always room for improvement, for innovation and adaptation based on what's happening on the ground. That's why we've begun to leverage new tools and technology to increase our production and lower our overall housing costs. This photo here is our first micro-unit project. I personally like to refer to this project as tiny homes in the Big Apple, which is New York City's nickname. And these are high-tech designs and apartments that increase affordability in our highest density neighborhoods. We've also started a modular housing program, allowing units to be assembled off-site and then quickly stacked onto literally piece by piece, just like a Lego set. This saves time and keeps costs down. And why we're here today with the City of Barcelona and our colleagues is because we want to do a lot more. And we want your help in helping us address these affordable housing crises. Building on our respective efforts, our call is to seek innovative technologies and tools to shorten project timelines, reduce costs, promote cleaner and more sustainable industry, and drive down the cost of construction and rehabilitation in dense urban areas, thereby making housing more affordable for all. At the end of the day, housing is the fundamental building block of a healthy city, and it is the best interest of every single resident, all of you in this room, that no matter where you live and how much you earn, that we have to work together with technologists, developers, and the entire private sector to preserve and build more affordable housing. No one can work, no one can play, no one can grow or create or prosper without decent housing, and ultimately that's the vision we're here to promote in terms of inclusive and equitable cities. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague Eduard from Barcelona to get into a little bit of the details of the challenge, and we'll open it up for questions. Thank you.
Great. So thank you all for being here, and to the panelists for such to-the-point presentation. My role here is really to make sure that you all leave this room with a clear idea of what we're looking for, and what in New York City they call an elevator pitch. So the exact condensed version of what we're doing here that you can share with your colleagues, tweet, and make sure that everybody that can help us with this will know. Can we maybe... Okay, we were going to show... Yes, that's it. It doesn't show here. So first thing, if you want to learn more about this initiative, you can just go to the Smart City Expo's website. And at the very top, you see there is... I cannot point it here, on the menu where it says calls. You just click on there and you will be able to access this specific call for the Barcelona New York City Affordable Housing Challenge. In there you'll have a description of the topic, which again is about innovative technologies and tools to drive down the cost of construction and rehabilitation of housing in dense urban areas, thereby making housing more affordable for all. Some of the examples that we are referring to in the call are off-site prefabrication, building information modeling, 3D printing, and others, just to give some ideas, but we're really open to any ideas that you have in mind. The applicants or the profile of the potential applicants we're looking at is very diverse. We're thinking about city governments, municipal agents, urban developers, entrepreneurs, startups, but also civil society organizations, research centers, consortiums, and anything you can think of. So we're really looking at any idea that can help us produce, again, affordable housing. And as for the timeline, the call will open today. So if you go online, you'll be able to access the form and start looking at all of the categories we're asking for. It will be open until the end of January next year. So January 31st is going to be the deadline for submitting your proposals. Then in March, we'll be announcing the finalists at Calalier, which is the new Urban Innovation Center in Barcelona. And the finalists will have the chance to present their proposals in front of an informative audience. And in May, we'll be announcing the winner in New York City at the Smart City in New York City. And again, the finalists will have the chance to present the proposal. And there's also going to be a budget of up to $20,000 to pilot the solution and eventually have the possibility to talk to responsible housing officials in both cities to try to find ways to put it into practice. So having said this, I think we can open the floor for questions, and we can also have a small discussion if needed. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Eduard. First, I would like to know if there's any questions on the floor about the challenge, because I do have a couple of questions that you have sent me, but they are more generic, which is good also because we do have a housing manager and a responsible from New York. But I don't know if any of you has any questions about. Can you please go to the micro at the back? Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Tracy DeLewin with Ernst & Young, and I'm doing the Smart City Strategy for Toronto, and this is one of our exact issues. And my question to you is, what kind of policy challenges are you running into as you aim for this phenomenal number with all your amazing affordable housing technologies? What policies are getting in your way, and what are you doing about them?
You can start, Sonam. Good.
That's a very good question. I think I can probably speak for both of our cities that a lot of the rules on the books that govern housing construction and tax credits, incentives, etc., are incredibly outdated. If I look at our own building code in New York City, in the 1800s, our city had a lot of fires. So then somebody, probably in my position, decided that you're not allowed to build anything with wood. And now technology has advanced enough where you see actual timber construction, not just for low-rise buildings, but also high-rise buildings that are being piloted in cities like Stockholm, in Toronto, areas that actually have pretty similar density conditions and weather challenges as New York. But again, our code is very old, right? So we don't even allow for that. That's just one example on the actual technology and front. I think another big challenge that we face that's particularly acute in the United States is that in the post-World War II era, our federal government had an incredible budget for housing construction. Our entire public housing stock, or the vast majority of our public housing stock in New York City was actually built that way. That's 400,000 units in a city of 8 million people, right? It houses a significant portion of our population. However, that income stream from the federal government has practically disappeared. And in the US, I don't need to tell all of you that we have a president who is a real estate developer but doesn't quite understand what it means to build affordable housing. So that's where we've had to be very creative, and again, I think similar to Barcelona in terms of how do we use our own budget and our own incentives, and again, work with the private sector to fill that gap, both to address the existing housing stock in New York City, but also build new buildings.
Well, we face many obstacles.
I don't have enough time to list all of them. But I will say that the first one will be that, as I said before in my initial words, that we don't have a long tradition in affordable housing public policies. So the point that where we stand right now is that from the total housing offer in the city of Barcelona or in the metropolis, because it's very similar, we, the administrations and the NGOs, we only control 1% of the total offer. So the offer is really provided by the market, 99%, which means that many, many different things, for example, the legal schemes, the taxation schemes, and the technical rules, they are designed only for private offer. So we do have a problem in how to introduce the logic of public providers, PPPs in affordable housing, in order to adapt the existing rules. This will be, I think, the main philosophical but very pragmatical problem. The second one is that we have a deep lack of resources. Even though my English is not very good, I'm not going to mistake now when I share with you that the public budget, the public direct expenditure in housing in the city of Barcelona, but also in other places in Spain, is 0.06% of our GDP. And the average level within dense urban areas is 1% of the GDP. So we are expending 20 times less than our peers. So we do have a very severe financial challenge, which drives me to the third point that I'm going to raise, that we not only have a problem of lack of resources, we also have a problem of insufficient financial innovation. The framework right now is extremely primitive. Most players, they think about market solutions or directly subsidized allowances, subsidized solutions, and all the room in between, which is immense, because we would be talking about investment, impact investment, specific bonds, one-purpose vehicles, all different types of PPPs, which means different types of financial instruments. In our environment, there is still a thing to explore and develop. So I will say that the main three obstacles are those ones. We don't have a tradition, our legal framework and tax framework is not adapted, and we lack resources and financial innovation.
Do we have more questions on the floor? No, doesn't seem. So, oops. Let me go to the questions again. And one of the questions we have is that which kind of policies or what policies are your governments carrying out to tackle the gentrification issue? Yes.
That's a question I get almost every day because I don't know if you've been to New York recently, but there are significant neighborhoods across New York City that have rising rents. And I shared some of the statistics with you earlier. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is how to keep the neighborhood fabric and the neighborhood communities intact while still building. Like many other cities, there is a fear amongst residents that if there is a new building going up next door, that means I'm going to get kicked out of my apartment because I won't be able to afford my rent, right? And my entire neighborhood will change. And for us, that fear is real. That has happened in the past. It continues to happen. So there are a number of things that we're trying to do to combat that, right? It's the government trying to combat market forces, which is actually quite difficult, but we have a huge new program for tenants and legal services. So we provide free legal services to every single individual in New York City to go to housing court and fight cases against their landlords or other neighborhood developers, et cetera, et cetera. And the city of New York bears that cost in supporting them. Another big focus is on community preference. So that means that, again, any new buildings that go up, and as I mentioned earlier, we have this policy of mandatory inclusionary housing, where 30% of the units in each new development have to be at sub-market rates. The lotteries for these buildings are upwards of 90,000 individuals applying for 100 units. So your odds are very slim. However, if you're living in that specific neighborhood, you'll get a preference on preferential treatment, because again, our goal is to keep families, keep individuals, keep communities intact. The list goes on, but those are two very concrete examples that we hope will address some of these issues of gentrification while still allowing us to build higher and more densely populated neighborhoods, because at the end of the day, it's just economics 101, right? Supply and demand curves are not that complicated, and we must increase the supply of housing because our demand is off the charts.
Yes.
So, okay.
Continuing exactly from the very sentence that my colleague was using, we are also working in trying to increase as much as possible our supply. Not any type of supply, because here in among market circles there is this belief that any type of supply will reduce the price. We are stating that we have empirical evidence that we don't need only to increase the supply, we need to increase the supply of affordable public, social and PPP housing, mainly in rental. So we are working very much on that, but as I told you before, if we have to jump from 1% of the supply to 2, 3, 4, 5 and on, is self-evident that the supply solution is only part of the game, and we need other instruments. A big round of action in the municipality has been for several years, try to cope the short-term uses of housing, which means to limit the number of permits that the municipality issues in order to do touristic accommodation. We have them covered in 9,000, if I don't mistake. And then we have done a town planning instrument, which is called PEWAT, which is a zoning instrument in which we divide the city in 3 different types of zones. Ones they have to remain with the existing stock of touristic accommodation. The other one they have to decrease, and the third one an increase is allowed. So we have to redistribute the authorized stock of touristic accommodation. This has been a very intense effort in the first part of the municipal term. In the second part, we have implemented exactly the same technique that the New York City was quoting before, this 30% of affordable housing in all new developments. We already had before what we call legal reserves for social and affordable housing, but they take place only in greenfields. When we operate in the existing city and building to building operations, these legal obligations they were not applicable. Now we are using the same technique as New York or Paris and many other places. So all new projects, they will have to provide with 30% of affordable housing for sale or for rental. And we have a preferential right of acquisition. So if the municipality wants to purchase those units, we can do so and add them to the rental public municipal stock. But I'm not going to stay only here, because the challenge is so big. We have to increase our supply. We have to change the composition of the market so much that we know that we have to use other tools, mainly two different tools, which is we need a massive rental allowances program, which is not, by no means, is going to be able to be carried out by the municipality. This has to be a regional or state effort. as it is in other places in Europe and in the Western world. And the second thing is that while we build, purchase, and mobilize vacant stock, while we increase the affordable supply, and while we provide with allowances, it will take a lot of time in order to reshuffle the situation, and we are advocating for a legal system where the cities, we are allowed to publish official indexes of rental prices, and in exceptional situations, in time and space, not universally, in some places of the city, and for a certain period of time, we are advocating for having the legal powers in order to cap the increases of the new rental contracts, of the renegotiation of the existing contracts, which is not very original because we are advocating for the German system. We will like to implement a Mietspiegel and a Mietpreisbremse here in the city of Barcelona. So this will be more or less our menu in order to fight gentrification, which is a very, very tough undertaking, because both New York and Barcelona, we are interested in attractive cities, and we don't want to be less attractive. We want to be as attractive as possible, but as inclusive as we can manage.
And I hope that this was a good conclusion, because I'm sorry to say that we ran out of time. I wanted to thank very much all the speakers and hope to receive all your ideas for our challenge. Thank you very much for coming.